keep their screen going so you see that crowd. Studio VU lecture. My name is Lutz Köpnick. I'm a professor in cinema and media arts and German studies, and I will provide the introduction today. It's really my tremendous pleasure to introduce Jessica Houston today, our speaker this afternoon, in my role as a co-curator of No Footprints Even, a current exhibition at the Vanderbilt University Museum of Art that features Jessica's work all the way until May 11, 2025. Due to a medical emergency, the curatorial engine behind this show, Jenna Harper, unfortunately can't be with us today and do this introduction as initially planned. So let me say a few words about Jessica and her work to kick off her presentation this afternoon. By now, many of you hopefully had a chance to see No Footprints Even at WUMA. The exhibit presents four related bodies of work that all tackle the legacy of polar exploration and travel, explore the relation of modern science, speculative thought, and the arts, and perhaps most importantly, ask really tough questions about the footprints we as humans are leaving on this old and ever new and ever more fragile planet. In one of the projects on view, Jessica buried a capsule with 22 handwritten letters into an Antarctic glacier, with the assumption that potential readers might be able to access these missives in about 1,000 years from now. As many of you know, Jessica was here in Nashville in February for various events and workshops associated with the exhibition, including for a lecture which we, due to unexpected circumstances at the time, needed to cancel. Luckily, however, we didn't have to wait 1,000 years to unseal that lecture, that talk, and we have her here today with us, live from Montreal, as it were, to speak about the different tributaries and creative processes that led her to pursue her fascinating work on glaciers, on ice, on magnetism, on deep time, and on the different people that live in, travel to, and represent Earth's polar landscapes, past and present. Jessica's work is deeply interdisciplinary. It involves and entangles different media of representation, and it is based on extended research processes, whether these involve studying the intricate techniques of 19th century landscape painting, the abstractions of modernist color theory, the notebooks from men who think they do their thing as men by trying to conquer the poles, or the complex dynamic of frozen fluids. Or whether such research processes demand Jessica herself to wrap herself in uncounted layers of clothes, to travel to the Arctic in a small boat with an all-female crew, to learn more firsthand from Inuit up north about the burdens imposed by our climate changing. Jessica's intrepid research-based work is meant to unsettle what we take for granted about polar narratives, and including the comforts we typically enjoy when enjoying art. But make no mistake, this work's strength and rigor, its beauty and thoughtfulness rests on Jessica's admirable way of never compromising her artistic process for some misbegotten idea of comfort herself. Jessica is no armchair traveler, nor is any of her work that of an armchair artist. It is complex work, demanding work. It makes no detours. It takes no shortcuts of any sort. The relation of art and research, science, and thought are rarely balanced in the public eye today. Artists, many often think, may help illustrate complex ideas or theories, but science has little to learn from how artists approach their subject matter. What I find so fascinating about Jessica's work over many years is both the courage and the grace with which she blows asunder such stereotypes. She collaborates with cutting-edge scientists and thinkers as much as she literally collaborates with the ice. But the work that emerges from this at no point is meant simply to illustrate what people in other fields might be doing. It engages with them, engages them, while always following a confident and deliberate artistic compass. It always stays true to an aesthetic vision that wants us to look at her delicate brushstrokes or at her times quite humorous collages on their own terms, as serious, as good, as compelling and formally consistent art. as the kind of art our damaged planet and our transactional society so direly need as a model, as an inspiring playground in Richard Powers' recent sense, in order to make sure our future still has a future. We had about 1,000 students visiting No Footprints even over the course of the past 2.5 months. Their often astonished eyes and curious questions about Jessica's works provide plenty of evidence that research and knowledge, even today, can and should take on many different forms, and that the experience of art that, like Jessica's, is serious about itself, about its artistic claims and its aesthetic traditions and contexts, that art is still deeply transformative in nature and can remain so for some time to come. I'm really enormously grateful for Jessica to have rearranged her busy schedule and be here with us today after we had to cancel the initial lecture in February. Let me also express my thanks to the Department of Art, the Studio VU lecture series, the staff at the Vanderbilt University Museum of Art, and last but not least, my curatorial and I guess not so curatorial partner in crime, Jana Harper, for making Jessica's shows and this afternoon's lecture possible. And with this, I pass on the virtual microphone to Jessica Houston and ask you all to welcome her wherever you might find yourself right now. Turn is yours, Jessica, please.
Thank you so much for that introduction. And also, I'd like to just thank the entire team at the Vanderbilt Museum for the dedication and energy in bringing this work to your community. Our conversations began in COVID about it, so it was a long time in coming, and I really appreciate the perseverance that was involved and the outcome, the way that it was realized really so beautifully. And I also definitely want to thank the Vanderbilt University Department of Art, including Vesna Pavlovic, for the support in welcoming me here today and also in February, where I really so much enjoyed my time visiting the students. I had so many thoughtful conversations with really faculty, students, general public, and it was really very enlivening. So I just wanted to extend my appreciation. I'm going to share my screen real quick and continue from there. So just let me find it. Okay, sorry. Okay, here we go.
There we go. It's coming.
Yeah, sorry, do we see, now we see the.
Yeah. You still want to do the
Yeah, okay.
slideshow mode.
Yeah, it should be, I think it's here behind that actually. Okay, here we go.
There we go. Good.
Okay, good. Yes. All right. Thanks. Because I wanted to just actually show these pictures while I was saying that, because we did so many fun things together and I really enjoyed it. You know, the gallery walkthroughs, the collage workshop, the drawing workshops, and my visits with the students. And it just was really an affirmation of how exciting conversations through art can be. And I really appreciate that the time that we had together. And of course, I have to give an inexpressible thanks to Jana and Lutz, whose belief in this work, I think, comes from our shared love of wild spaces, the perspective of deep time, and art's ability to reimagine the world. Jenna's generosity, her ever-quick intelligence, and curatorial insights throughout the process have been meaningful for me personally and clearly emanate out into her students and her larger professional community. And I also owe a particular thanks to Lutz Kopnick, whose writing has allowed me to see my own practice through a new lens, enlivening both my hands and my thinking with fresh possibilities. So his insights in the essay that he wrote for the exhibition not only shape this exhibition, but will surely inform future trajectories of my work. So, No Footprints Even are the last words of Ursula K. Le Guin's short story Sur. Here's a little map that she made. Her fictional account of 9 women who, quote unquote, discovered Antarctica before any of the famous male explorers, but who intentionally left no trace of their voyage. This idea of leaving no trace is a common thread that runs through much of my work, and I wanted to go back a little bit in time to give some context to how I got here. I was first invited to the Arctic in 2008 by the British organization Cape Farewell, where I worked with artists, scientists, and a group of students to make cultural responses to climate change. It was in this moment that I first experienced the polar regions directly and was confronted by the reality of the land, the lichens, the mosses, the ice, the history, and the people. This tactile, embodied sense of place is what led me to start working in the Arctic with communities, land, objects, and archives for the past 17 years. So now I'd like to return to the idea of leaving no trace, or the idea of absence, using my Horizon Felt series as a point of reference. In 2015, I sailed the Northwest Passage, and in 2018, the Antarctic Peninsula. Using the horizon and colors from the land and animals and history as points of reference, I placed different colored felt in front of my lens while photographing these sister poles. I wanted to obscure part of the image as a response to our literal lack of the long view in relationship to our environment. By creating these color-filled images, I also empty out the landscape. Le Guin urges us to navigate the world with humility, where our mark is light but intentional. By obscuring part of the image with color, I tried to take a photo without taking very much at all. Abandoned outposts, remote scientific stations, retreating glaciers, all speak to the life of places and the storied matter that shapes them. These photographs take stock of the embedded histories of the poles and their entanglement of colonialism, capitalism, and environmental injustice, while opening up a space for the imagination. So as I mentioned, I made this project in the north and the south. So these are the ones from the south. And the colors are really taken from all kinds of things that I found around. So seaweed, moss, berries, ships, gravestones, seals, flags. They all interrupt notions of an uninhabited white polar space. The convergences between human and beyond human species and spaces reveal that we are materially embedded in our environment just as much as it is within us. The color interrupts the visual language while simultaneously maintaining a long view. We are implicit in this juxtaposition of viewpoints, as our capacity to think beyond ourselves is central to our collaborative agency in imagining alternative possibilities. So the visual space opened up in these photographs could also be seen as a withholding of the image, which finds further manifestation in the Letters to the Future project. The ice, like the world itself, is in a constant state of flux, forever shifting, evolving, and reshaping, just as the creative process does. My works, while divergent in medium and subject, offer multiple views on the same questioning of systems of thinking, moving fluidly between the real, the quote-unquote real, and the quote-unquote symbolic. In my practice, materials influence ideas just as much as ideas make form. So the Letters to the Future, it's a 1,000-year collaboration with ice, a quiet offering to a distant, unknowable future. I invited poets, indigenous leaders, artists, scientists, and environmental thinkers, including author Anne Michaels, indigenous leader Okaliki, physicist Carlo Rovelli, composer Arvo Part, and philosopher Rosie Braidotti, among many others, to write a handwritten letter addressed to the future. These letters, sealed and unseen, have been placed in a time capsule, this one, and buried in the Drawning Maud Land ice sheet, which is here, by Hélène Hubert, the operator of the Princess Elizabeth Antarctic Station. According to current glacial measurements, they will emerge in approximately 1,000 years. That's to say, the ice will carry the work for 1,000 years before releasing the capsule to the Southern Ocean. So here's the ice hole, and here's the map that sort of explains. We can see the little red dot is where the capsule was placed. We can see that we're located on that sort of northern edge of Antarctica, which is close to the Princess Elizabeth Station. and that it would take more or less 1,000 years for the ice to carry the capsule and release it into the ocean. And it's quite interesting to think about this fact of ice being something that's constantly moving and also moving at different speeds. So we can see the different velocities in this map here. And the work was really, the placement of the work was decided in collaboration with Hélène Hubert, who knows his terrain very well, and this to achieve the timescale that we were looking for. So here's what that project looks like in, in another exhibition form. Just to say that this work exists in the space between presence and absence, past and future. As Rosie Braidotti writes, the present is both a record of what we are ceasing to be and what we are in the process of becoming. The act of withholding the letters from the present invites a recall forward, a paradox where meaning exists in what is unsaid, in the tension between what we imagine and what may one day be read. It's a meditation on time beyond the scale of human life, on our fragile relationship with a planet that carries its own archives in the ice. So here's an example of it's a sort of a speculative future possibility of what could exist. The work is dated 3019 or 3023. So sort of in 1,000 years, we see the capsule emerged on the shore, and we see the little penguin off in the distance over to the right. But this question of withholding, so the letters, as you have seen in the gallery, we have the photographic documentation of the letter with the author's signature on the back. But I never read the letters, and no one from the present has read them. So it really is this sort of thing that they are withheld from now, and they really are for the future. And this withholding of the letters from the present is really, I think, also what triggers our own imaginations. Like, what would you write, in this letter if you had to write one to the future? So the work is radicalized through absence. The content of the letters is withheld, perhaps forever. The project is activated precisely because of this gap. This creates a speculative space, one that demands projection, imagination, and a negotiation with the unknown. The philosopher Giorgio Agamben writes, "The act of creation is an act of withholding as much as it is of making." Agamben explores the potentiality of things that remain in reserve, what he calls potentiality as such, or the capacity not to be actualized. The letters lie in wait, entrusted to the glacier. So deep time runs through my work as both a conceptual framework and a material reality. In Letters to the Future, ice itself determines the project's timescale. It's a collaborator alongside the contributors, carrying the letters for 1,000 years before releasing them into the Southern Ocean. The letters are embedded in the movement of ice, reminding us that the Earth is not fixed but in constant flux. The glaciers are not static landscapes, but living archives containing thousands of years of planetary history, records of climate shifts, volcanic eruptions, and atmospheric changes long before human civilization. And this is a project with a very different timescale. Over the Edge of the World. It's really looking at and interrupting representations of the polar regions in the National Geographic magazine for roughly 100 years. So the polar regions have long been framed as frontiers to be conquered, places where the human figure looms heroic, isolated, and victorious over the enemy of ice. Over the Edge of the World disrupts these narratives by dismantling the visual language of exploration. Using collage, I reconfigure 100 years of National Geographic imagery, deconstructing colonial and masculinist tropes to tell other stories, those of ice, whales, and the people who refused to leave a trace. This work foregrounds the agency of ice itself. Ice is not inert. It moves, speaks, and records. It's a slow force, carrying with it histories that defy conquest. In revisiting these expedition images, I seek to unmake their authority, to unravel the idea that these landscapes were ever blank spaces to be filled. In slicing into these archival images, sometimes violently, sometimes with humor, I am also interrupting a certain human timescale. The slow agency of ice becomes a temporal critique, pushing against the urgency and the linearity that has often structured narratives of discovery. These collages invite another kind of looking, one that lingers in the fragment, that listens for glacial time, and that reckons with what resists capture. The human figure here is not central, but ever contingent to its evolving context. If the explorer once stood triumphant at the edge of the world, this work asks what it means to stand instead in relation to ice, to history, to the future undoing of the present. So the Yelcho expedition, it's interesting, the trajectory. So it's like from the photographic documentation of the polar regions to the imagined story of Ursula K. Le Guin's all-female expedition. I'm exploring how reality and imagination intertwine. This duality culminated in my own real-world journey, an all-female expedition across the Northwest Passage, which I then documented through photography, but I'll tell you about that later. This series of oil paintings, back to the Yelcho expedition, is inspired by Ursula K. Le Guin's short story Sur, written in 1982, in which she imagines an all-female expedition reaching the South Pole in 1909, years before any recorded explorer, only to leave no trace of their achievement. In Le Guin's story, the women board the steamer Yelcho in Chile and cross Antarctica, but they choose to keep their journeys secret, resisting the colonial and patriarchal obsession with documentation and dominance. In these paintings, as Lutz has written, quote, ice is neither pristine nor conquered. It is dark, swirling, uncertain, suggesting not just the dangers of the journey, but the dangers that the journeys impose on the land itself. So the women's decision to erase their presence challenges the rhetoric of conquest. Their legacy is not in what they claimed, but in what they refused to take. And again, there's this interesting little kind of echo of this withholding, because, in the story, it starts off talking about how the expedition narrative of the Yelcho was hidden in the attic, along with the wedding shoes and the finescos and other things. So we have this kind of harking back to the hiding of something. And anyway, these works kind of tell the tale, of this narrative of seeing the ship, of imagining Antarctica, of imagining Scott and saying, well, if Scott can do it, why can't we? Of the 9 women going off onto their journey, of the Yelcho itself, of them passing by Captain Scott's, balloons, and seeing the whales, and finally taking a little ship ashore, seeing the Erebus and the remnants of Captain Scott's hut, which was quite funny because when they went in, the penguins greeted them and they saw the hut and they said, "Oh no, no, this is far too messy. This won't do." So they didn't want to stay there, which is a funny little moment. And within these moments of like tongue-in-cheek sort of humor, there's also this seriousness where Le Guin really questions her heroism, and she says that we understand that people, other people understand that behind these ideas of heroism, are other people who suffer different sets of consequences. And this painting is actually inspired by Captain Peary. When he reached Greenland, he found a part of a meteor, and he wanted to take it for himself, and he actually hauled it off. So we see that there's the US flag was wrapped over this meteor, which was then hauled onto the ship, which was ultimately brought to the Natural History Museum, along with six Inuit, and put on display in the museum. So it's when she's putting in to question these ideas of who is celebrated and under what circumstances, that the re-looking at history and understanding what's behind these questions, I think, is so relevant, because of course it's relevant now. What is it that we're holding up? What are the value systems that are you know, needing to be put in question? And how is it that we can care for the planet and the people who live on it with a different kind of ideology? Here we see the little ship and the big glacier. So they're traveling along. They finally, make land. They set up some temporary tents, although they decide that they don't want to have any, permanent structures. So they end up building these sort of tunnels in the ground, and they are making art and playing the banjo and doing all these kind of different, interesting sort of things as they're also planning their expedition. And finally, the Yelcho, goes across over the edge of the world, with this strip of orange light over the horizon, and they're left there to their own to their own adventure. They practice, hauling, they do their depot runs, they get dizzy, they climb the glaciers. They finally, think that they see all these different suns, and they're sort of finally reaching this place that they've worked so hard to get to. And they say, well, I don't know. I mean, there's nothing really here. Like, what's the big deal? Should we leave a cairn? Should we plant a flag? No, no, we don't think that's necessary. And they say, oh my goodness, like, why would anybody, why are we even here at all, basically? And, they're asking themselves these questions. And then finally, one of the women gives birth, and they decide that it's time to go back home. And they take their vessel, the Yelcha comes and picks them up, and they say, well, we really don't think we should tell anybody about this, because, the poor Amundsen, well, they say at the very end, which I can't forget this, they say they leave and they say, yes, at the very end of the story, she says, we left no footprints even. And within that is the fact that they also told nobody of their tale, because then later in 1909, Amundsen ends up so-called discovering it, and they say, well, it's a good thing we didn't say anything about it, because he would have felt he would have felt very sad to realize that he wasn't the first. So this beautiful way that Ursula Le Guin is able to offer us this kind of, very funny, very tongue-in-cheek, and very serious account of exploration is really something I find so amazing, in the way that it also really asks us, like, what stories do we tell, and how do we tell those stories, with what kind of language, what kind of brushmark, what kind of sensibility. So along with the Yelcho expedition is the Magnetic Observatory, which is very important, because in the beginning of the book, she references Captain Scott's journey. And Captain Scott's journey was actually the first expedition that was sort of meant for scientific purposes. And one of their main goals was to carry out magnetic observations. And what I loved about having this magnetic observatory, and what I also loved about when I was there in person, so many people asked, okay, yeah, I get the glaciers and I get the expedition, but I really don't get, how does this fit into all of it? And it's that exact kind of trip up, where we're expecting something, and when something else comes in, another kind of visual language comes in and sort of interrupts what it is that we're expecting. Those are the moments that I love in art making, and I love those moments in life too, where something, maybe there's more that meets the eye. And the magnetic observatory sort of offers that component, and in particular because it's really referring, largely to invisible forces, and to forces that are beyond our control, but we nevertheless participate with them, in a daily way. Um, and that they've been sort of here since the beginning of time. So since ancient times, magnetism has been understood as an unseen force, one that pulls, orients, and guides. Thales of Miletus speculated that lodestone contained a soul, and in later centuries, magnetic observations were established in polar regions to study the Earth's shifting fields. The Magnetic Observatory weaves together these histories, reflecting on the invisible forces that shape exploration, navigation, and our relationship to the unknown. My paintings in this series incorporate star charts, mapping instruments, and speculative diagrams that connect the early theories of magnetism with Antarctic expeditions, particularly Robert Scott's 1904 journey to measure the magnetic pole. So there's the lodestones, and there's Robert Scott's journal open to the page where he talks about how the Earth is a magnet. So this work kind of resonates very much with this idea of not doing, which is this turns out to be Le Guin's poetic translation of the Tao Te Ching, where we have this beautiful poem that says, "Not doing. Those who think to win the world by doing something to it, I see them come to grief. For the world is a sacred object. Nothing is to be done to it. To do anything to it is to damage it. To seize it is to lose it. Under heaven, some things lead, some follow. Some blow hot, some cold. Some are strong, some weak. Some are fulfilled, and some fail. So the wise soul keeps away from the extremes, excess, and extravagance." So these are sorry, that was a little prism that was in a previous exhibition of it, but here's these other collages, which are different in a way than the Edge of the World ones, because these are kind of, I find them very funny because they're basically imagining if we were to take the idea of exploration or quest and put it in an immaterial light. And so what I've done is I've taken the expedition images and I've taken the text exactly as I found it from the National Geographic magazines telling about these tales, but I've just added one little other element to kind of flip it over into the spiritual realm. So here it says, before opening the overhead door to the storm, they discussed their launching strategy. Or here, they surveyed the mountain peaks as philosophical. Or into mystery land beyond the pole. Or here, one of the major jobs of the expedition, aerial exploration of the great unknown. And then here are some of the paintings. So this is a balancing land, because Antarctica historically, before it was ever, quote unquote, discovered, there was speculation by the Greeks that when they had a sense of that there was a land in the north, they said, oh, well, there must be something in the south. And so they called, even when it was invented and not, mapped in an invented way, they called Antarctica a balancing land. So here's, I'll just share these paintings. So this is both above and below, of a difference in which the differences are inseparable. Compass rose, born of sight and memory. If the two realities are thus brought together, where the self lives, between them, heart world, holding up and attracting the earth, and a polar structure. So I wanted to end with a quote by Lutz again. So he says, Lutz Kopnick says in the essay, he said, "Sometimes the magnetic observatory tells the viewer, doing nothing indeed leads to something. Like Francis Elise's 1997 performance, these humble and aesthetic paintings toy with the paradoxes of practice in our damaged human-centered world. They invite the viewer to become the very ice our carbon footprints increasingly turn to water. Retune your credos of doing, shaping, measuring, extracting, and trading. These images urge the viewers. Amend the dogmas of productivity, busyness, and progress that have generated your present emergencies in the first place and have eviscerated your ability to be mesmerized by anything that is not of your own making. Be the ice you force to melt at accelerated speeds, and then take things from there." So I find that to be a lovely way of kind of bringing that back home. And, this question of what's more real, the scientific photograph of a researcher in Antarctica, a speculative future image of a time capsule buried in ice, or the images evoking the magnetic forces that keep our planet in motion. All of these works challenge the boundaries between the tangible, the imagined, suggesting that perhaps the most real truths are those that blur these lines, where what is felt, what is seen, and what is imagined all coexist. And in the space of perpetual transformation, where art and life equally inform one another, and where the imagination has the power to reform the world around us. So, although in different forms, these four bodies of work share common concerns. How do we exist in relationship to a world that will outlast us? How do we tell stories that resist the impulse to dominate? And how do we imagine a future in which the marks we leave on ice, on land, in history, on one another are gestures of care rather than conquest? So I would, if we have time, I can show a little bit of the um, expedition that I took subsequent to this project. I don't know, Lutz, what do you think? Or Vesna, or
Yeah, I think that'd be a great idea. I think we have enough
okay.
time.
All right.
Go for it.
So let me just get very good. It's not too messy. Okay, so
Yeah,
basically
that'll very clean desktop. Very
I just
amazing.
I should tell you guys. I'm this is like a like a little 10-minute thing, but I wanted to show this to you because I thought that it was really an interesting just the way the whole work follows. So after I made all that whole project that you just saw, then I ended up sailing the Northwest Passage with Okalika who's the former chair of the Indigenous for the Circumpolar Council, and she's an Indigenous leader, and she's amazing. And I worked with Noemi Plana, who's a scientist, and we sailed in a little sailboat the Northwest Passage, and en route we interviewed women in the hamlets, and we also had Zoom interviews with people all across disciplines, and basically celebrating women's role in Arctic exploration. So that's what this is about. So it's an hour-long film. I'm just going to show you, it's like 12 minutes, and so it's a little excerpt of that. So basically you see the footage from our journey, and then the voice is, you hear the voice of different women talking.
One
So
moment, Jessica, before you started, make sure that you also have, I can't remember what the latest version does, but you need to also empower the sound, basically the sound, if there's sound to it.
there is sound. So how do I do that again?
There's
Uh,
somewhere a button in the sharing where it also asks you, it used to, where it also asks, can you share sound? There,
all
yeah.
right.
It
Why don't I
it
play it and
might
you
come,
tell me if you hear it.
it might,
Do you hear anything? Okay.
no,
All right. Sorry. Video,
no, it will be in the Zoom,
audio.
in the
Okay.
share Zoom
And the share Zoom.
interface.
Okay. Screens, share sound. Okay.
See that? Okay, good. That should do it.
All right. Thank you for your patience. Okay. Okay.
I find that unless we go to the elders directly, it is hard to get a story. It's always told from somebody else's perspective. I listened to the radio in Greenland where they have a series of Knud Rasmussen's travels from Greenland to Canada. it would have been nice to hear it from also the Inuit who encountered explorers or people that came from the outside. I think our own stories should definitely be out there because we talk about different things. I always thought Inuit women in particular are so strong. Our voices are totally magnified. Sila Kluches, Mary Simons, and the woman who went with Knud Rasmussen on their explorations. There's so many powerful Inuit women. What empowers us women during that whole changing of our culture, being moved into communities and our autonomy being taken over or run by outsiders, we learn to survive. I always go back to what the elders would say, because you have to respect the environment. You have to respect the animals. That's why we got the tattoos, to respect the sun, to respect the sea goddess, and to respect our environment. I do firmly believe that Inuit way of being is so important. I think we need to retain that Inuit knowledge of respect. Everybody is accorded the same respect and the same space. That's what I learned in the Inuit community. It's always us. In Denmark, and what I learned in Greenland is me first. It's me, and then it's everybody else. I've sailed the Northwest Passage a few times. After I got my chin tattoo, I was sitting in the audience when one of the NTI presidents stood up in the parliament and presented the name for the Northwest Passage, which is Resolute. And I remember my pictures being taken through the Northwest Passage where the name comes from. It looks like the chin tattoos. The mountains come down like this, and there's lines going like this. And they look like women chin tattoos. Huge, huge mountains going right down to the ocean. That was the proudest moment, looking at the horizon. Me being at the time the only one with chin tattoos, and the Northwest Passage's name being presented to be the chin tattoos of a woman. That to me was amazing.
Since I guess 2014, I've really done a deep dive into these icy worlds and the conceptual possibilities they open up. I don't think that this is an instantaneous process of learning to reorder the conceptual coordinates of your world or your thinking. We have these ideas that humans are special, we're different from the rest of the world. Oh, but now we've pumped so much carbon dioxide in the atmosphere that we're now threatening all existence, biological existence at least. What does this mean then if we're actually a geological force on par with the orbital tilt of the Earth or tectonic plates? I feel like it's one of those things that is a process, like relearning how to see the world. Sea ice offers a kind of positioning that decenters human beings. And so what are some of the ways to offer a glimpse of what the world looks like from the perspective of sea ice? Sea ice produces its own time. It takes a while for it to melt and to grow, and that some of those anomalies in thickness or temperature are remembered by the ocean. And that changes how the sea ice grows and decays. And so that has a time scale that's determined by the ice itself. And that's also different from time that humans make with calendars or clocks. This is a time completely independent of human timekeeping devices. Sea ice also can generate completely different timelines and different realizations of the future. This ability to produce the future is not exclusive to human beings, and also just inherent to the ice itself as frozen water. It does release in some ways a different temporality. Like as it melts, it's unfolding in time in a certain way that entrains human beings insofar as we're trying to like organize shipping or create policies to combat greenhouse gases.
I sailed through the Northwest Passage twice now, and that definitely is a theme that would always come up, talking about the whalers and the explorers who came up and like how there's two different worlds happening at the same time. For Inuit, it's Inuit Nunavut. We have always traveled and we are familiar with the land. And there's like a lot of oral stories talking about the different places versus what the outside world sees of the Arctic. When I was on the ship, I would give lectures, and one of the themes that I would talk about often is land place names in Inuktitut, because in English, all of these islands and even like the channels, they have English names. Growing up, I only knew the name in Inuktitut, and there's a special twist to how Inuit named back then. They were not named after people who, quote unquote, discovered it. It's just describing what the land provides or what it resembles. And I feel like even just that relationship with the land, there's that respect and like understanding that it is not something we own, it is something we work with and respect. There's a lot of stories about the Arctic, but it's more wholesome when like the local community is involved in the storytelling. And I think that's really important. I live on Baffin Island, and then there's a bunch of little smaller islands around because it's common between Greenland and Nunavut. The name Qikirta is like Mountain Island, and you have Disco Bay around there. They have Qikirtakswaq, which means the same thing, big island. These names are all around the Arctic. And I feel like within the last few years, we're regaining that sense because there's the water channel above Violet Island. It's called Dadalagutu Imanga, and it was named in Nunavut by Inuit, and it's related to the existing names already. There's a mountain over there. The sand would go down, so it creates like a V shape all around the mountain. And that area is called Dadalagutu, which means chin tattoos. So we see that in the mountain. And so when they named that water channel Dadalagutu Imanga, it's like the water belonging to the mountain.
Qikiltaw gaklikan na napakuti kasang ng masukiyak ayayayayayayayayayayayayaya Upig juili lang at taukaw tilang may banga kang at taraw Wilitok ta kasang niyarigavin Sukiyak ayayayayayayayayayayayaya Kangatang ayo rama kangatadjang itung asukiyang ayayayaya ayayayayayaya ayaya Kangatadjang itung kangatang ayo rama sukiyak ayayayaya ayayayayayaya ayaya
Okay. Okay, so thanks for listening to that. Just as at the end of that, because that was an excerpt, we first heard the voice of Ayu Peter, then Julian Yip, who was talking about the sea ice, then Mariah Erklu, who was talking about the Inuit naming process, and Abby Utuva, who sang the song. Just so, because it doesn't correspond with the list as it's presented there. Okay, well, I'm super happy to hear questions. I hope you have them. I feel like you're all far away and I can't see you very well. So, and I mean, you're all so tiny in that little box there, but I just want you to know that I remember each and every one of you, and I remember your work, and I remember our conversations, and I'm very excited to just hope you have questions and don't feel so formal and, funny because we're on Zoom.
Great.
Okay.
Well, thank you. Let me thank you first of all in the name of everyone who's on this call. It's always a little awkward on Zoom that I guess we can applause, but it's sort of not communicating very well. But super exciting material, and thank you for sharing the richness of these works. Maybe I pass it on, Vesna, to your kind of crew there. Do you want to sort of funnel some questions on that end?
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you. First of all, thank you so much, Jessica. This was right there.
Yes.
To the camera.
Yes.
I'm seeing you on this other monitor.
I
Sorry.
compared to see you live with my binoculars.
Jessica, thank you so much. This was a beautiful lecture as well. Your show is very beautiful. We've engaged with it many times, and Jana gave us a really beautiful walkthrough the exhibition, and it's sort of interesting to that we all gather here sort of affected by the weather and affected by the storm, and so it's like ironic, that it happens. But I'm glad that we found this time. I wanted to start off, and then while students here are thinking, the seniors, by asking you a little bit about, I mean, there's many things in your lecture that stood out to me. The kind of what prompted your exploration, the reality of the land. And I think that the reality of the land like really beautifully translates into your form. And so your work has like really a beautiful aesthetic quality to it. So it's very engaging, whether it's a collage and a cutout or a kind of a question of representation, then it's or the painting or the drawing. So I wanted to comment on this on the expectation, your expectation on the letters for the future from 1,000 years from now, because it seems like a really a beautiful poetic gesture for something that seems utopian, like how would we know? And then it made me think about the photograph of the speculative photograph of the future. And, like in photographic representation and technology, AI is something that we are constantly like struggling with. But your photographs seemed so realistic that I thought it was real and sort of taken right there, and that it was here was that thing that came out somehow through the eyes, and so I
did take that, Vesna. I did take that photograph.
Okay, good.
Because
so,
I brought. Okay, sorry, I don't know what your question is, but yeah.
Right. Just to comment a little bit about that, almost like impossibility, because I feel like the impossibility of action against that poetic gesture of attempt and trying to make a difference and trying to affect something or trying to send a message to the future. Kind of reminded me of Trevor Paglin's work of sending this disk to the moon, or the engraved disk, or the satellite. So yeah, if you can talk about that, like possibility and impossibility, because it seems that is the world we're living in.
Yeah, I appreciate that question because I think that that's an interesting, it could be even like a contradiction within the framing of the work itself, like this idea of not doing, but at the same time, as you say, there is the gesture, and um, I don't really know how to answer your question because I think that the gesture of the poetic gesture or the attempt of doing something is almost in a way very intrinsic to each one of us, in terms of how is it that one feels compelled to act or not. That's very individual. Like I don't think it's like I don't think it's a given. Or maybe I can say this in a different way. I think that we all have our own very individual ways of engaging, and that some of those things might not look, very political or very environmental, or it might just be the fact of sitting and knitting has a relevance, in terms of a mindset or an activity or ideology. I don't know. So I definitely am not like, saying that art has to be political or that it has to be, engaged. But I think that what's most important is that we have a feeling, a connection, a connection to ourselves and then to the world that we live in. And I do think that art can help, help with that. And whether that's because you're a maker and you make art, and then that's, the way that you make art, it helps you connect. I think that's super relevant and a real thing. And or not. I mean, there's other people who just through looking at art or engaging with it, it can connect. But I have a belief that it does really have it can help us as humans be connected with ourselves and our environment. And and I think that if we are connected, then the ways in which we engage will feel quite natural. And I think that the fact of engaging might also feel, come in natural kind of ways.
Thank you. Eva has a question, and I just want to give you a comment back. In the title of your show, "And No Footprints Even," it seems like it's a beautiful dichotomy for you wanting to send a footprint to the future, but
Yeah.
it's impossible, or we don't know. So it's like kind of like a beautiful contradiction.
Yeah, there's a lot of ambiguities in there for sure. And just to touch upon this idea of the utopian, I mean, like her story is this feminist utopian thing, and then it's like, okay, 1,000 years, who will be there? I mean, really, what I'm appreciating most about the fact of being able to put those different works together and to make art at all is the fact that you can really ask a lot of questions, be provocative, and leave a lot of ambiguity. And that's something that I really appreciate. Yeah.
Eva has a question. Eva?
Hi, thank you for the presentation and the videos. I don't know
I
if
can't see you.
Yeah, here.
Oh, come and let me see you. It's so much nicer.
Come in.
Nice to see you again. Hi.
My question was like, because I know you like we were talking a lot about like, how like the environment like grows and changes and it's always like in flux and thinking about specifically sending a message through ice, um, with kind of like the like state of like consumption and you know, um, just general like environments weather and you're like, oh, the polar ice caps are melting and like all that stuff. Like, what did you think? I guess what was your like consideration? Like what if like or like I guess how do you contend with like the possibility that like oh no like what if it actually gets uncovered in like 400 years instead of without like the idea that like our like your intention on sending a letter to the future might be impacted by like humanity's own disconnection to the earth.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question because, of course, the obvious first go-to place is, oh no, it's all melting. So, what's going to happen with that? It is true that the ice is melting. Where we placed the ice, it will, I mean, maybe if the climate change will impact it in a slight way, but not like 600 years kind of way. So for example, like the continent of Antarctica, it's like the Antarctic Peninsula where I actually took that photograph of the ice capsule, that's with the little penguin in the back. I took the capsule and without the letters, but I placed it in several places and I took that photograph. So in that, and where I sailed, that will not be there in 1,000 years for sure. But the continent, of Antarctica, the ice will remain. So yes, climate change will impact it, but that's really why I collaborated with scientists to choose the location of where we put it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I guess my question was more on like whenever you're working with something that is so kind of like affected by like what we do to the environment, I guess
Yeah.
what I figured you probably put a lot of research into like where you were gonna place it. I was thinking more of just like how do you contend with like um the fact that like our own like contributions are changing like that environment so much and changing like um how things will be in like 1,000 years, like that.
So what's your question? I'm trying to grasp into.
What was your thought process? Like, what was your thought process on like whenever you kind of came to face with that fact? Like, oh God, like our own. I don't know. I feel like there's a lot that goes into deciding to like send letters to a future so distant.
So what was the thought process in terms of my own like contending with our impact on a place so far away?
Yeah, and also sending letters to like planning for such like a distant future and like what did you think that things would be like and what did you think like I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I don't know. I don't know any more than anybody else. I think that some days I think maybe we'll be there. Other days I think, well, maybe we really have to contend with the morning of our civilization. Some days I think different things at different times, but I love knowing that while I'm having these thoughts and you're having your thoughts and we're all here, those letters are embedded in the ice. And I like to imagine that those letters all together are also having their own kind of conversation. Like, as it's a crazy thing, like this kind of is not totally random because I chose people whose ideas I really respect and who I find, very interesting, but they're very divergent people. And so having all of that whole conversation like tightly enclosed in this little capsule, it makes me, I mean, honestly, sometimes it makes me kind of laugh, to think about the conversations that are being had in that container. And it makes me laugh like within a very serious, very difficult, very also mournful moment. I mean, it's difficult for us to watch what is occurring with open eyes. And I feel like that is also a form of engagement, to be able to love our planet, to love each other, to acknowledge what is occurring, and to remain joyful is an act of engagement.
Vesna, we have a question from the audience. Maybe I can sort of thread that in at this point, Amanda, and then we can come back to the student group again. Yeah. She's been very patient for a while. Okay, we'll find her sound.
Okay, I'll try and ask it quick because I'm at work and there's all these dogs barking. Thank you so much for everything. My question is I was the Taoist point at the end that you shared, and the idea of if you're wise, you take the middle way, not too extreme. And then I was struck by the idea that the poles are actually extremes. So you have this like tension between not going to the extreme and following the middle path versus like taking an expedition to the pole. So I was just wondering, I kind of came to some sort of reconciliation for myself. I think in that I think that that's maybe one thing that Ursula Le Guin was trying to say by you do go there, but you leave no trace. But I'm wondering if you had any thoughts on reconciling the middle way versus extremes.
Yeah, that's a great.
And that's actually to Lutz and to Jessica, really, because I feel like you both have thought about this a lot.
Well, do you want to start or should I?
You do.
Okay. I think that the very question of going to the poles is something that I think about a lot, and it is something that I don't take lightly, you know, the actual carbon footprint of my presence in those places. And at the same time, you know, I try to really make that valuable, you know, for whatever, you know, in whatever way that I can communicate issues around those regions. So that's something, you know, just in terms of like my actual footprint that I do really take very seriously. And I don't know if that's really about the middle way, but I think that there's a lot of ways to answer that question. You know, just in terms of like our everyday engagement with, you know, how much we travel, or what kind of things do we consume, or, you know, all of those kind of questions I think are really important to think about. But I don't know. I think that maybe there's something also like a philosophical kind of underpinning that is a guiding point there. And it's this idea of getting off of the binary. And I love that you brought up the poles, because I also think it's so funny, you know, it's like even like people, when you hear in science circles, they often say like, oh, the bipolar scientist, blah, 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 because they travel to the both poles, you know, and it's like the two regions. And the way that we've actually set it up, you know, as being this binary. And I think that is revelatory of a lot of the difficulties of our thinking, you know, planetary thinking, and especially in the US in terms of our political thinking, that we've made it into such a set of extremes. And
Yeah,
I think that those are like thought habits that need to be questioned, provoked, and untangled, because the reality is things are so much more layered and complex than this sort of binary scenario that we often sort of seem to set up as a system, or as a model, or as a template. So
absolutely. Yeah,
proposition of the middle way, I think it offers, you know, a third, a fourth, a fifth. I mean, it offers a sort of something that's getting out of the pole of those extremes.
absolutely. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for the question. Lutz, do you want to add something to that?
Uh, well, I think I had to sort of think about when you talked earlier also about sort of questions of the edge of the universe, or the edge of the Earth. Somehow, you know, it's the same with the pole somehow. Who's extreme and who's edge, right? I mean, the Earth is a ball, it's a sphere, right? I mean, it has no extreme in that respect. It's sort of us who consider sort of these poles as extremes because they have climates that are very adverse to our comfort, so to speak. Yes, I guess one could make a magnetic argument. There is something special about the poles, but overall, it's just sort of an extreme because we have constructed it as such. Last week, Dan Morgan gave this talk about sort of his work with students down in Antarctica, and he was sharing with us some images of what turns out to be the southernmost existing post office on the McMurdo station. And I was sort of baffled on some respects, because here I thought I had been in Patagonia at some point at the southernmost post office that exists. And I was surprised that there's a one further south. But then I wasn't that baffled, because I started to realize these are just our constructions of what is sort of the most extreme, because in the end, it's all on a ball, so to speak. And sort of north and south and east and west, sort of these are sort of our constructions of what is extreme in the first place. And I think sort of the perspective that Le Guin, but also you, Jessica, in your work with the stress also on questions of and strategies of entanglement really advocates, is sort of taking back a little bit our very own understanding of extremes, and sort of put that into what was maybe what Amanda was talking about, sort of as a middle way, is maybe sort of a way of relaxing a little bit the way we want to frame this Earth or this planet or its geographies in terms of our cartographies, and in a way, what for the Earth might be extreme might not be for us extreme, and what for us might be extreme isn't necessarily when you assume some kind of planetary perspectives. So it's a question of scale as well. But I don't want to go into more. This is your talk, it's not me. But we go back to Vesna, because I know there's some more questions on that end. I see it.
Well, I want to ask the students if there's one. I have a question too. Jessica, I think students here, we just opened the senior thesis shows, They've been working this spring very hard, and there are 4 years here. And I wanted to ask you to talk a little bit about this time that you take on when you think about your project, because those are decades, and those are projects that evolve over time, projects that you have to believe in, projects that you have to fund, projects that you have to imagine. So could you give us a little bit of as students here, they're just, leaving Vanderbilt and venturing into their future art careers, and other careers. So if you can give us a little bit reflect on your process, like what does it mean to take one project over a period of 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think it's not like I set out to do all of this. I just sort of, something started and then other stuff happened. And I think that that's very important to realize. If it looks like when you like are older and you have a lot more to look back on, you're like, oh yeah, I did all that stuff. But truthfully, I mean, I will say something that I find really interesting though, and I think that I did allude to this in the talk, is before I went to the Arctic at all, I was reading about it and imagining about it, very much like Ursula Le Guin was talking about how she was imagining Antarctica. And I do think that there's something so powerful about the imaginary, and that something that as artists, like not to take for granted, what it means to sit and dream, what it means to, even when you're not even making anything, when you're just sitting there on the couch or you're on the bus, but your thought process, and you're imagining, you're visualizing, you're making connections, and the power of the thinking process is fundamental really to making. And then you have an idea and you start making something with your hands, and then that's another thought process that kind of where it comes into the world that can guide you. And I think that that's a beautiful thing as artists, that we have that gift where, and writers have it, in a different way, where you have an idea, you make something in the world, and then that thing is separate from you and it leads you on to something else. And you need to be very paying attention to what those little guiding points are, and it takes sometimes a lot of, like you said, Vesna, like a lot of belief in it. Because, someone else may think, oh, that's a stupid idea. I remember I told a friend when I had the letters to the future idea, I was like, I'm kind of thinking about doing this thing. And she was like, oh, that's not a good, she was like totally dismissed it, And I was like, okay. And then I'm like, well, whatever, I think it's a good idea. I'm going to go for it. But the point is that maybe somebody else doesn't, can't see your vision, or, might not believe in you, or, you might not be getting a job, or you're not selling things, or the market isn't believing in you, or you didn't get a grant, or who knows? I mean, we face a lot of obstacles and the road can be quite long. And sometimes it can feel a little bit lonely. And I think what's really important is this feeling that, when you're making things, that you are in dialogue with not only your own deep self, but the materials and the lineage of artists who have come before you, whose work you love, whose work resonates with you. And you can always go into this wellspring of like a resource. And time is not linear in that way at all. You walk into somewhere and you look at a painting and somebody made it 300 years ago or whatever, and you're just like, your heart leaps out of your chest. And like those things are so real, and those things about how you listen to those kinds of communications, I think it's really important. And that accompanies you. And the more you work, then the more you kind of trust it, you trust your intuition and your sense of things and your aesthetic and your understanding that like your own aesthetic is so powerful that it communicates so much more even than like your artist statement does, and that the funny little weird thing that you're always pushing off and saying that's like not what I'm doing is actually the main thing that you're doing. It's like, it's these things, it's having the courage to kind of trust all of that, all of those little funny little whispers, and also the community that you make with friends around you, and then the community of artists and thinkers that have come before you, because those ideas are still very much alive and they're still speaking. So I wish
That
I
was
could be there
beautiful.
in person and see your work because I was so interested to hear each and every single one of you. And I remember all of your projects. And now I'm just like, oh, well, I wonder what happened, what happened with this and that. So you'll have to send me some pictures.
We'll share the link of once the exhibition is photographed.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank
Great.
you.
I guess we see a little glimpse there in the back, but not much in the installation space. Anyway, we're probably at the end of time at this point. I don't want to sort of hold up Jessica for too long. It's an hour later where you are, and we don't want to sort of take up too much of your time. But thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. Also for sort of being willing to reschedule when we had to cancel, unfortunately, in February. It's been really great to hear you talk about all these different projects. Thanks for the audience who came from other places to this, but also thanks to Vesna for sort of gathering your troop there and having them. That's an applause. We can't hear it, but and well, the show is still up until mid-May, May 11th, I guess, a couple of days after graduation. So those who graduate and have their families and parents on campus, make sure that you make a little sort of excursion over to the gallery as well. And those who haven't been there yet, go anyway. And well, thanks so much, anyone, everybody, and looking forward to seeing you in different contexts soon.